Hey, Sean, did you want to do introductions or um, you're on mute there? I can't, you're on mute.
I think you introduce yourself, I'll introduce myself, and then you go ahead and just start presenting.
Okay. Well, hi, everyone. Thank you for coming tonight. We had a few technical difficulties, so we're starting a little late. But my name is Crystal Danko, and I'm a second year Kansas Lend trainee in the family discipline. I have two boys with ADHD, and I decided I was going to create a parent survival guide for caregivers who are maybe new to neurodiversity or just got a recent ADHD diagnosis for their kids. So I'm going to share a little bit about my resource guide, and Sean Swindler here will also add a lot of information about ADHD and the school systems. So Sean, do you want to introduce yourself?
Well, I'm Sean Swindler from the Kansas Center for Autism Research and Training, and also part of Blend. And tonight I'm going to talk about some school advocacy around ADHD. And I'm also the parent of a 22-year-old with autism and intellectual disability. So I'll turn it back over to Crystal.
All right. Well, let's start with some, let me get my screen shared here. Can you see that, Sean? No. Let me get here. All right. Put this in slideshow. And do you see my screen? Okay. So this is a little bit about ADHD. Let me start out by saying I am not a doctor. I do not have any medical background. I'm just a mom with some experience going through this diagnosis, and a lot of kind of cards fell after that. And I wanted to share what I've learned. We'll start with, where am I going here? Let's go back here to slide 2, which is statistics. I'm not going to share a lot of statistics. This is just a little bit of information about the number of kiddos with ADHD. This data was taken off the CDC's website, and that was from 2016 to 2019. So you can see about 6 million kids. I imagine this number has grown since then. I don't have anything later than that, but this is kind of what we're looking at. That's a lot of kids. And so we really need to learn a little bit more about ADHD and understand how it impacts families. So when a kiddo has ADHD, everybody's story is different. This was mine. We had some behavioral problems arise out of it. There were school suspensions. Extracurricular activities became a problem. I mean, there wasn't anything that was fun anymore. Caregivers' jobs can be at stake. And then, how does that impact everybody? It's rough on the parents, it's rough on the kids, it's really emotionally draining. So I put together some things that I feel like caregivers can do. It's really a lot of learning, right? You're going to need to really become informed on what ADHD is, what it looks like, and how it can impact your kids. Really, therapies, different kinds of therapies work for different kids, depending on what their diagnosis is. Medications sometimes are needed. School intervention is very important. And then advocating, right? You need to know your kids' rights. You need to advocate for them in school and advocate for them in policy. So that really means that you've got to learn what policies are going to impact your kids. And a lot of times that has to do with school, fully funding special education, those kinds of things. What does it mean? Take a look at what's happening out there and get involved. So I'll share a little bit about my personal experience. For me, my first son, when he was about 7 years old, he must have had a bad day. I don't remember all the specific details, but he came to me and he said, "You know what I would do? I would use Papa G's sniper rifle. That's how I would make this all go away." And as you can imagine, that is heartbreaking, and you're hearing it from a 7-year-old. And it was a really tough thing to do. So of course, we're rushing. We're trying to stay calm and explain to him that, no matter what's happening, we're gonna make sure we get through this. But then, we're searching then for a doctor. What do we do? Who do we go to? Do I call Children's? We ran into wait lists, need for referrals. It was not an easy process. When we finally got into someone, I ended up having to call a family friend who went to medical school and knew somebody that got us in, and that's how we were able to find the doctor at the time. So we got him in. He immediately recognized that this was not depression, it was ADHD. I thought he was full of it, kind of questioned him a little bit, because this kid is talking about hurting himself at 7 years old. How is that not depression? But he asked my son, "What is your favorite part of the day?" And he said, "Well, I really like after recess when we could come inside and it's quiet time." And then he asked him, "Well, what's the worst part of your day?" "Recess." What kid tells you that recess is the worst part of their day? I had no idea, and I didn't know how to connect the dots, but thankfully, the doctor recognized what was going on. Everything got better. We worked with the school, we got him on medication. The path was pretty straightforward from there. Every child is different, not the same path that we had with our second. When we started getting ideas that he had ADHD, maybe, we brought him into that doctor to have him evaluated. And not only did he say he had ADHD, he said he had ODD, which I didn't know what that was. ODD stands for oppositional defiance disorder. I think if you ask doctors about that, you'll get different answers, whether they agree with that as an official diagnosis or not. I don't really care. All I know is my son was very oppositional and very defiant. And on top of the ADHD symptoms, the lack of focus, all the things. Well, let's add COVID in there. Right? Things are getting worse. We start having behavioral problems at school. It gets so bad that he has also expressed a suicide plan to his teachers. We don't know what to do. We are seeing a psychiatrist. He is on medication at this point. He is seeing therapists. We are doing everything. We're working with the school. We don't know where else to turn, right? So what's happening here? Mental health going downhill real fast. So is the financial situation, because that's not free. Seeing all those doctors, right? And what about the impact to employment? Every day I'm getting a call from the school. He's run away, he's cussed out a teacher, he's, on and on and on. Ended up talking to a friend of mine, and he mentioned PCIT. Never heard of that. Parent-child interactive therapy. it was a life-saving therapy because it taught us how to work with our children, how to talk with them. I mean, meet them where they need to be met, right? So you can't just parent every child the same. And I just really can't say enough good things about PCIT because it really changed our path forward. So I highly recommend that everybody takes that, whether their child is having behavioral issues or not. So we went through PCIT, we got on the right medication, we were partnering with the schools. It turned out that he wasn't in the right program in the school we was at, so he was transferred to another school that had a social emotional resource program, and everything got better. And now we're doing great. But through that challenge, I also had to quit work so I could stay home and take care of him over the summers. I couldn't just enroll him in a summer camp with a poor 18-year-old kid counselor, and he cusses them out or does something on the first week, he'd get kicked out. So it was a really big process and a big impact that it had on our family. So all of this, right, now we're in a good place, and I'm thinking about all these things about how, wow, what if you just took one of those blessings away, right? What if you didn't have two full-time incomes? What if you didn't have a strong family unit, or we didn't live in Johnson County, or we weren't going to Blue Valley School District? What would happen? And I was thinking about all the things that I wish I knew at the time that we were going through all this. So I decided to create a resource guide to hopefully help other caregivers who are going through this, because I have personal experience of it. I know the feelings of hopelessness when you don't know what to do. You can't focus, let alone do the research on what is ADHD, how does it affect the brain, how do I parent this child with oppositional defiance? So I understand that I had all the blessings lined up for me to make it possible for me to survive this situation. And I wanted to help others because I know that's not the case for a lot of people. So I created this guide for caregivers who are new to ADHD or neurodiversity, maybe if they're in crisis or don't have the time or energy or mental capacity to do all this research, right? And I wanted it to be a little bit more digestible because there's 1,000 books out there, but if you're not ready to read it, or you don't have time and you can't focus on it, then that's not going to help anybody. So this past year, I've been going through articles and books, watching documentaries, webinars, listening to podcasts, listening to books, because sometimes people learn differently, and I'll have a book and paper, and I'll have it on audio, and I'll go back and forth depending on what I'm doing or where my mind is at that time. Joining listservs and policy and advocacy, you can do that, just kind of understand where your legislators are and what's going on in policy and advocacy for kids with ADHD, kids with disabilities. And I took an IEP advocacy training through Families Together, just so I could learn more and become an advocate for other kids who don't have parents to represent them. And I joined the Blue Valley Special Education Advisory Council to kind of represent my kids' school and the parents there. So through all this, it was a very overwhelming experience going through all this research, right? But it validated that because I'm in a space to do that right now, and I can help, not everybody is, and that's why I was just validated for creating the resource guide. So it turned out to be a 31-page resource guide. It's basically a lot of resources, right? So it's for caregivers it's got different types of media. Like I said, some people like podcasts, some people like books, some people like just to look through data on a web page or, audiobooks. So it's also organized by topic because it's not meant to be a guide that you read from beginning to end, right? So I really wanted the ability to just click on something. Your kids really acting out when they're at a restaurant, or, it seems like no matter where you go, there's an issue. That might be a sensory thing. So you can click on sensory and look at that. It's just got some more articles on sensory and what sensory processing can look like. And it also includes some visuals. So one of the visuals that I really felt was extremely helpful to me is the ADHD iceberg. I'm sure you've seen this. It's different versions everywhere, but I think it really hits home. Not everybody's gonna run into these same things, but if you look at them, like what's happening, he's got mood swings, he can't function at school, he can't keep track of anything, he's depressed, it's poor sense of time. You say you got 5 minutes, they don't get 5 minutes. I mean, no kids do, but really, really difficult for kids with ADHD. So, I mean, so many of these things really, it's more in depth than it looks like on the surface. So in the manual, as I mentioned, there's articles, books, websites. You can look at the comorbidity, co-occurring. It's just this diagram in there. How ADHD doesn't always, or rarely, I would say, I don't know, I'm not a doctor, but is it just ADHD, right? There's so many things that go along with that. Again, section on sensory, home and community-based services, benefits, treatments, different kinds of therapy, medications, and so on. So this is kind of the layout. And I did pull aside some just to look at here real quick. I wanted to mention that these websites are extremely helpful. They're research-based. You can trust anything that you find on these sites. So I wanted to include them in here, but a lot of the information that I gained for some of these other sections, I pulled off of these websites, right? Like Chad is an amazing one. I just got an email today about some upcoming podcasts that are happening. And actually, my next slide is on some great podcasts, all things ADHD. Some that they have on there from this newsletter I just got. Well, we all know, I hope you know, that October is ADHD Awareness Month. So there's some articles in there. Working with Latino patients and their families for treatment professionals. There's all sorts of becoming an adult and managing ADHD. Lots of great resources. That's just this month. So you can get on some lists as well, some newsletters. And here's a couple of really good podcasts that I have in there. And some of them specifically learning about, schools and advocacy in the schools. And so I encourage you to go out and look at some of these podcasts, or click on the resource guide and go through there. And if something hits you, just check it out and see what you can find in the resource manual. And at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Sean to talk about school and IEP advocacy.
Well, thank you, Crystal. And so what Crystal is talking about is that experience of being a parent who has a child with ADHD. One of the things we definitely want to talk about, for future research is there's a long list of folks who are fairly famous and really successful who have ADHD, because a lot of folks who have ADHD and have support will tell you there's some gifts that come with it. And there are some positives that come with it. There are some superpowers that come with it. But when you're growing up and when you're going to school and when you're dealing with some of the core issues of executive function and emotional regulation that go along with ADHD, especially as a child and adolescent, it can be really difficult. That's especially true in school. So we're going to talk just briefly. This is a much larger topic, but briefly about some school and IEP advocacy things to talk about with kids with ADHD. First thing is that under IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities and Education Act, all children with a disability, which includes ADHD, have a right to a free, appropriate public education, period. That's been the law since 1976, and it's been upheld in multiple, even recent Supreme Court decisions. And so IDEA actually addresses ADHD under the other health impairment section. And in the regs, it very specifically states that one of the reasons you can get an IEP is that you have attention deficit disorder or ADHD, along with other. So the law recognizes that our kids with ADHD qualify for IEPs. Go to the next slide. So one of the things that was out there before IEPs was a 504 plan, and they still exist. A 504 plan is something that offers kids accommodations for support they might need at school due to a disability or a health impairment. An example would be a child who's a diabetic might need an insulin shot sometime during the day. It may be just some basic accommodations that can be delivered through Gen Ed. To support somebody sometimes with ADHD or other learning disabilities. The problem is that 504s may give you some accommodations, but they don't actually give goals that everyone's held accountable to. And they don't actually have goals where we're making academic progress and social progress. IEPs also offer discipline protections. If I have an IEP and I do something that gets me suspended from school more than 10 days in a school year, the school team has to come together and re-meet and say, why is this happening? And to redo the IEP so the child is supported. Likewise, oftentimes IEPs include services from related service providers like speech therapists, occupational therapists. A lot of times kids with ADHD benefit a lot from those related services. So one of the big complaints we hear is that parents who have kids with ADHD want an IEP, but are told we're going to do a 504 plan or we're going to do some sort of intervention. That's fair. That's how SPED works in Kansas. It's a response to intervention state, and they try other gen ed interventions before we give you an IEP. But if a child is failing, is missing school, is having all sorts of other issues, then getting that IEP is really the appropriate choice. We'll talk a little bit more on that. So when you request an IEP, they're going to do an evaluation, and that you have a say in what's in that evaluation. It's always going to include school data and observations, testing that might be done by the school, but they also have to give what's called due consideration to any testing that's brought to the school by parents. That means if I have a credentialed psychologist, psychiatrist, MD, who's diagnosing my child with ADHD, they can't question that diagnosis. They're not doctors. So they have to honor and give due consideration to that diagnosis. Likewise, that you can also approach as a family, as a parent, you can also approach an outside provider to do testing on reading level, math performance, things like that. So if your child is 2 grades behind in reading level, you can get an outside evaluation and deliver that to the school, and they have to give consideration to that. And so those are, when that IEP is evaluated, it's important to think about what else we can contribute as far as other outside diagnostics, et cetera. The next slide. So some of the accommodations that we can ask for, and this includes, I've got a kiddo that's not got an IEP yet, and we're just doing some Gen Ed 504 type accommodations, or these are listed on the IEP. One would be a designated spot in each classroom, especially in middle school or higher, to hand in homework. so that my papers don't follow me all through the school day through 7 changes of class and to my locker and back home? Can I have a special box where I put my papers and hand them in? One of the awesome things, we're going to talk about this later, is that technology is our friend here. That you can get first and last thing in the day assistance with organizing homework and papers. So your child stops into a resource room first thing in the day. Somebody goes through the notebook and says, let's make sure you've got all your stuff here that we know is due. And at the end of the day, let's make sure we've got everything that needs to go home or that's going to be due tomorrow. And that check-in, even a 5 to 10 minute check-in at the beginning and end of the day, can be the difference between failure and success in school for a child with ADHD. Another one is free access to materials, pencils, papers, tools, band instruments needed to participate in class. I don't know the number of IEPs I've been to where a student with ADHD has gotten a 0 on a test because they lost their pencil and for the 10th time didn't bring their pencil to class. Well, the name of the class isn't Bring a Pencil 101, it's biology or it's math. So let's provide that child with a pencil, in the classroom that they can access, and that they're not, if they lose it, they have access to it. Likewise, notebook paper and scissors and materials that you might need for class, because this going to my locker, getting stuff and bringing stuff to 7 different places in the school is a recipe for disaster for kids who have executive function difficulties. The other thing that we hear sometimes when we say about a middle school kiddo, hey, we're going to have a place to hand stuff in, we're going to give them pencils, we're going to give them paper, we're not going to let them lose stuff, we're not going to let, I often hear, well, if we do that for them, they will never learn how to do it themselves. And the truth is that by the time I'm in 7th or 8th grade, this is how my brain works. I have an executive function issue. The rest of my life, I'm going to need supports for my executive function. So I'm going to need the tools to help support my executive function and learn how to use those. When you look at busy executives who might have ADHD, they have 5 secretaries, and they definitely have people who help them manage all of the things that come in and out of their office. And in a lot of ways, our kids with ADHD need that executive assistant who can help them manage those things. Another piece is extended time on tests. That's a very common. Note-taking assistance, especially in the upper levels of high school, is available, and a system for tracking assignments and responsibilities. And this is where I say, yay, 2023 technology, because that box I said that has to be in the classroom for them to hand everything in. Well, now that can be a SharePoint or a Dropbox or an electronic version of that. So much easier to track. Helping somebody manage their files or what's due on a Chromebook is so much easier than having a big fat notebook where we're shuffling papers. And having electronic reminders, whether it's on a Chromebook, whether it's on an Apple Watch, whether it's on a phone, that can help a child keep track of all of these different responsibilities. That's huge. Having an electronic calendar that a child can access throughout the day and just say, oh, I'm supposed to do this, or something beeped, let me look at my phone, oh shoot, I need to remember to bring my math book home tonight. So many great tools we have for technology that if we can help our kids learn how to use it, we're giving them the tool they're going to need the rest of their life. Next. Some more accommodations, preferential seating. Kids can be impulsive and distracted, and so finding the seat in the classroom that's special. Sometimes it's not the one next to the teacher, sometimes it's the one farthest away from the teacher. Whatever works best in that room, for them to have that preferential seating. Homework reduction or elimination. There's a lot of research out there that says that homework really doesn't help kids, and for kids with learning disabilities like ADHD, it harms kids. Your opinions are going to vary on that, but there is a lot of evidence that if we can get things done during the school day, we're going to do a lot better. I will tell you that the experience a lot of parents have with homework is that I have 15 math problems to do for a 5th grader. And we're going to do, that's the homework for tonight. And they can do the problems. It's not an issue, but sitting down at the kitchen table and working through 15 math problems which should be a 10-minute homework assignment, takes 2 hours. And what are we gaining by torturing a kid to do something with tears streaming down their face for 2 hours? So a lot of times we talk about how can we reduce homework or eliminate homework and build it back up so that the child can be successful. The other piece is breaking assignments or big projects into smaller units, especially as we get into high school. Your semester grade is dependent on this gigantic report, your history report you are going to be doing. And if you don't have it in by December 2nd, you're going to get a 0 and fail the class. Well, if I haven't given interim times for things to be turned in every 2 weeks or every week to build up to that final report for a kid with ADHD, it's not going to get done and we're going to fail. So we have to break things into small chunks. The other thing that happens for kids with ADHD, they want to do well. Kids do not work against their own interests. Kids do not become defiant or oppositional on purpose. They're doing it because something's really not working for them in the world. And when kids are homework resistant or resistant to doing schoolwork, it's because it's really hard for them. And so how do I break those assignments or big projects into smaller units? And how do I help them succeed? The most discouraging thing for a kiddo with ADHD, and there's tons of research about this, is I try really hard to study for a test or to prepare for a project, and there's some small detail that I lose a pencil, I lose a paper, I show up at the wrong time, all these type of things happen, and I end up failing even though I tried. After that happens several times, kids stop trying, and kids don't want to be. So by the time we're in high school, we've burned that out, and it's really hard to get it back. So we have to help people be successful. Assistance and communication between home and school. You know, that note, again, yay electronica these days, but that note that's supposed to come home from a 6th grader to go on a field trip, if they have ADHD, that note ain't coming home all the time. And so unless we recognize that and make it so that we are not going to make the field trip contingent on an executive function exercise, that child's going to be very discouraged and not able to fully participate in their education. So we have to assist. And again, boy, text and emails, all the other great tools we have now have make a huge difference. The other thing I'll say is positive behavioral supports. We know for kids with both ADHD and autism that what can be perceived as punishment has a hugely negative impact. That punishment and negative reinforcement do not work for kids with ADHD. Punishment and negative reinforcement reinforces to a child that I'm a failure, I suck, I'm not smart, I can't do anything. This verifies that I shouldn't try, and I should withdraw, and I should be isolated, or I certainly don't want anything to do with this thing called school. Punishment increases anxiety and makes ADHD self-regulation worse, not better. So when we make kids with ADHD anxious, guess what happens? They stop, their executive function gets even worse, their impulse control gets worse, and their ability to organize gets worse. And their ability to think clearly on a test gets worse. Reducing anxiety is really a key to helping kids with ADHD be successful in school. And so you can think of it as punishing a child with ADHD because they have executive function deficits or because they're having some impulsiveness is kind of like punishing a child for needing glasses, because it really is inherent in how their brains work. So we need to talk about positive reinforcement. For kids with ADHD, we have to catch them doing what we want them to do, catch them being successful, and then we need to praise that and reward that and figure out how to encourage that. And sometimes for kids that are really far down the ADHD rabbit hole and we're starting to try to do something different, we have to do the smallest things. We have to catch them doing the smallest things that are successful. Gosh, you did 5 math problems today in 10 minutes. God, we're getting ice cream. You have to reward kids for doing this stuff. The other thing we know about ADHD, and this is really interesting brain research, that for kids with ADHD, some of the reward systems in the brain don't work the way they do for other kids. We don't know why. Is it because I've had ADHD for so long that kind of piece got broken in my brain when I was supposed to learn it? Or is it because this is how my brain is structured? But reward systems don't work the same way. There's dopamine and all sorts of other things happening. So basically, when a typical kid does a test and they get an A+ on the test, they get such a jolt of reward from that. And their brain links up all the hard work that they did and is imagining all the praise they're going to get and thinking last time they succeeded and how good they felt. And that is a motivator. Our kids with ADHD, their brains do not register the same level of reward for getting an A+ on a test that a typical kid does. So we got to supplement that. We got to find out other ways to reward them. So some other areas of concern in school, school refusal and lack of attendance. We talked about some of the frustrations our kids have in school. So thinking about, well, if I get to a certain point in junior high or high school where I hate school so much, I'm going to, at the best, skip certain classes, or I'm just not even going to go, or I'm going to isolate myself at home and refuse to go to school. That leads to charges of truancy. That leads to all sorts of, obviously, if you're not at school, you can't receive interventions, you can't learn. It's really, that's a huge area of concern for our kids. Self-medicating, kids with ADHD are more likely to get into things that'll self-medicate them, like different kinds of drugs. And so it's really important for our kids to be supported. One of the things we talk about with IEP discipline protections, the two things it doesn't protect you from are if you have drugs or a weapon at school. There is nothing an IEP can do to protect you if those two things happen. Impulsiveness. The impulsiveness is okay when I'm blurting out an answer in class, or when I'm being really funny with my friends or my family. The impulsiveness isn't as good when it's an emotional regulation issue and I'm mad and I slam the door of the classroom so hard the glass breaks, or when somebody provokes me and I retaliate. I'm going to skip to the final one, bullying. Kids with ADHD are much more likely to be the victims of bullying than not. They're actually rarely the bullies, because you know what? Being a bully takes a lot of executive function and organizational skill. I'm going to target this kid. I'm going to take their lunch money every day, and I'm going to keep track of how often I'm taking their lunch money. And if they don't give it, I'm going to remember to get them tomorrow. That takes tremendous organizational skill that our kids don't have. So kids with ADHD are much more likely to be victims of bullying. Why is that? Well, kids with ADHD are quirky, they're neurodiverse, they sometimes are different than other kids. Sometimes a kid latches on to, I can be the class clown, or I have a wonderfully vibrant, funny personality, or I'm kind of the kid that'll say and do anything because I got a lot of people around me, and that's awesome. Sometimes kids with ADHD can channel that into being an athlete and to get that energy out on the athletic field, and some of the skills you need to play basketball. You hear coaches all the time say, well, you have to live in the moment, and if you miss a shot, you got to go right back and do it again. Well, that's perfect for kids with ADHD. So sometimes our kids have those strengths, but sometimes people identify that this kid's different and they do get picked on. And so it's really important to recognize, how that bullying looks. A lot of kids with ADHD who get tagged for fighting, they really didn't start it, but because of their impulsiveness, they're finishing it. And 30 years ago, if a kid got into a fight, 7th grader got into a fight at school, hey, 2 boys are fighting, let's break them up, come in after school for an hour, don't do that again. These days, we have a lot of juvenile justice and other stuff that gets tagged when that happens. So we've made it a more serious issue than it used to be. So mental health and depression, Crystal talked about that. One of the things that happens with ADHD is, because I'm not on the same track other kids are on in school, I can become socially isolated. I can become depressed. I can become frustrated. Why am I different? Why is it so hard for me to do these 15 math problems when my sister or my friend can sit there and do them in 10 minutes? Why am I always in trouble? Why am I the one who's always having these things happen to me? Why do I lose everything? That a lot of kids can get really depressed from that. There's some research that was done where they had a fake classroom full of typical kids. They brought a teacher in and they said, okay, teacher, just so you know, these 4 kids, and they identified them, have really bad behavior problems, ADHD, autism, things like that. So keep an eye on these 4 kids. Those 4 kids were completely typical. Guess who got in trouble every day in class? It was the 4 kids they identified, even though there was nothing wrong with them. So one of the other things that happens with our kids sometimes is you develop a reputation in a school. That's the impulsive one. That's the one I got to keep an eye on. So if I'm being kept an eye on all the time, what happens? Well, I'm going to be caught doing a lot more stuff that other kids don't get caught doing. Likewise, kids with ADHD are not organized and are not attentive. And so the kid over here who's neurotypical, who's spray painting the side of the building, recognizes when things are going awry and they get out of there. And our kid with ADHD, who is also pulled in to do that same activity, doesn't, and they're the ones who get caught. So there's a lot of those kind of school concerns that happen with our kids that we have to look at. And so really, we're happy to answer your questions. If you post them on this video, we'll try to get back on here and we will try to give you some answers to those questions.
Well, I think that's all we have for tonight. Thank you all for coming and watching this training. Let us know if you have any questions. Thank you.